Lily always struggled with speaking English. She knew many words, but when it was time to talk, she had to translate everything from her native language. It slowed her down, and she felt frustrated. Why can't I just think in English? She wondered. One day, she met someone who had the answer. Hey there! Welcome to English Tone, your favorite place to learn English in a fun and easy way. Today, we'll explore a story about Lily, a girl who wanted to think in English but didn't know how. By the end of this story, you'll learn simple ways to train your mind to think in English without translating. Let's get started. Lily had been learning English for years. She could write long sentences, read English books, and even understand English movies if they had subtitles. But speaking was a different story. Every time she tried, she had to think of the sentence in her native language first and then translate it into English. This made her slow and unsure. She wasn't alone in this struggle. Many of her classmates faced the same problem. They could memorize grammar rules, do well on written tests, and even score high on listening exercises. But when it came to speaking, they hesitated. Words felt trapped inside their minds, like birds in a cage, unable to fly freely. Lily wished she could speak smoothly like native speakers in movies. She admired how effortlessly they talked, how words flowed naturally without pauses or second-guessing. She often wondered, how do they do it? Why does it seem so easy for them and so difficult for me? Every morning, as she walked to school, she thought about the conversations she would have that day. She imagined greeting her teacher, answering questions, and talking to her classmates in fluent English. But when the moment came, she froze. The words disappeared from her mind, and she felt her heart race. One particular day in class, her teacher asked, "Lily, what did you do yesterday?" Lily panicked. In her mind, she quickly formed the answer in her native language. "I went to the market with my mother and bought some vegetables." But before she could translate it into English, she felt stuck. Her mind was like a slow computer, loading the translation word by word. Her classmates, however, had already started answering their questions confidently. She watched as some spoke fluently and effortlessly, while others hesitated, but still managed to get their words out. But Lily? She just sat there, silent, her heart pounding. Her teacher smiled encouragingly. "Lily?" She opened her mouth, but the words wouldn't come. Finally, she managed to say, Yesterday, market, mother." Her teacher nodded patiently. "That's a good start. Keep going." But Lily felt embarrassed. She lowered her head, her face turning red. She had known the words. She really had. But when it was time to speak, they felt scrambled, lost in translation. Rest of the lesson passed in a blur. Lily barely listened. She kept replaying the moment in her head, feeling frustrated. After school, she walked home slowly, kicking small stones on the path. The disappointment weighed on her shoulders. Why can't I just think in English? She wondered. She had tried everything, memorizing vocabulary lists, practicing grammar exercises, even watching English videos every day. Yet nothing seemed to help her speak naturally. That evening, she sat at her desk, staring at her open English book. The words blurred together. She picked up her pen and tried writing a few sentences about her day. "I went to the market with my mother. We bought some vegetables. Then we cooked dinner together." On paper, the words came easily. But why couldn't she say them out loud? She decided to practice speaking by herself. "I went to the market," she whispered. But as she tried to form the next sentence, her mind went blank again. She sighed, closing her book in frustration. Her mother noticed her frustration and sat beside her. "Lily, what's wrong?" Lily hesitated, but then admitted, "I don't know how to speak English properly. I always have to think in my own language first, then translate." But by the time I do, it's too late. Everyone else has already spoken. Her mother gave her a kind smile. Learning a language takes time, Lily. You just have to keep practicing. But how? I feel stuck. Her mother thought for a moment and then said, "Why don't you ask someone for help? Maybe a friend who speaks English well?" Lily considered the idea, but quickly shook her head. "No, they'll just think I'm bad at English." Her mother laughed softly. "Lily, asking for help doesn't mean you're bad at something. It means you want to improve, and that's a good thing." Lily stayed quiet, thinking about her mother's words. That night, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The conversation played over and over in her mind. Ask for help? But who? Then suddenly a name popped into her head, Florence. Florence was the best English speaker in their class. She always spoke fluently, as if English were her first language. She never seemed to struggle like Lily did. Lily had always admired her, but had never thought about asking for her help. Florence was confident, popular, and always surrounded by friends. What if she laughed at Lily? What if she thought it was a silly question? But then she remembered what her mother had said. Asking for help doesn't mean you're bad at something. It means you want to improve. The next day, Lily saw Florence sitting alone in the school courtyard reading a book. She hesitated, her heart pounding. Should I go talk to her? She took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Florence," she said hesitantly. Florence looked up and smiled. "Oh, hi, Lily. What's up?" Lily shifted nervously. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course. What is it?" Lily hesitated for a moment, then finally blurted out, "How do you think in English?" Florence's eyes widened slightly, then she smiled. "Ah, so that's what's bothering you." Lily nodded. "I always have to translate first, and it makes me slow. I want to speak naturally like you do, but I don't know how." Florence closed her book and leaned forward. "You know, Lily, I used to have the same problem." Lily blinked in surprise. "You did?" Florence nodded. "Yes. At first I struggled, just like you. But then I learned a few tricks that changed everything." Lily leaned in, eager to hear more. "What tricks?" Florence smiled. "I'll tell you. But first, promise me one thing." "What?" "Promise me you won't be afraid to make mistakes." Lily hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Okay, I promise." "Good," Florence said with a grin. "Now let me tell you the secret." And with that, Florence began to share her knowledge, the simple but powerful techniques that would help Lily train her mind to think in English. Lily sat alone on a wooden bench in the park, watching the golden sunlight filter through the tall trees. A soft breeze played with the leaves, making them dance under the afternoon sky. She felt a tight knot in her chest, frustration, disappointment, and a little bit of hopelessness. "Why is English so hard for me?" she muttered under her breath, kicking a small stone near her feet. She had tried everything, memorizing vocabulary lists, reading grammar books, watching English movies with subtitles. But whenever she had to speak, her mind froze. Words wouldn't come naturally. She looked around and sighed. That's when her eyes landed on Florence, a girl from her class. Florence sat under a large tree, reading a book. She always seemed so confident when speaking English, as if the words just flowed without effort. Lily had noticed it in class. Florence never hesitated, never struggled to find the right words. Lily hesitated for a moment. Should she go and ask her? Would she think it was a silly question? She took a deep breath. No harm in asking, she thought. Summoning her courage, she walked toward Florence, her heart pounding a little. "Florence, can I ask you something?" Florence looked up, her green eyes warm and welcoming. "Of course, Lily. What's up?" Lily bit her lip, then blurted out, "How do you speak English so fast? Do you think in English?" Florence smiled, closing her book. Yes, I do. And you can too. Lily's eyes widened. Really? But how? Every time I speak, I think in my own language. First, then translate. It's so slow, Florence chuckled. That's because your brain is still used to your first language. It's like a habit. But don't worry. I'll show you how to train your mind to think in English. Lily leaned forward eagerly. Tell me everything. Florence stretched her legs out in front of her, thinking for a moment. Lily, imagine you're learning to ride a bike. In the beginning, you have to focus on balancing, pedaling, and steering at the same time. It feels hard, right? Lily nodded. Yeah, I remember falling. A lot. Exactly, Florence said. But after practicing for a while, you don't have to think about it anymore. Your body just knows what to do. Thinking in English is the same. Right now, your brain still uses your first language as a bike with training wheels. But once you practice enough, your mind will start using English automatically. Lily furrowed her brows. That makes sense, but how do I start? Florence smiled. First, you need to stop translating. Instead of thinking in your language and then changing it into English, you should train your brain to think directly in English. Lily sighed. But that's the hard part. I don't know how to do that. Florence leaned closer. It's not as hard as you think. There are ways to train your brain. I'll show you. Florence reached into her bag and pulled out an apple. Let's try something. What's this? Lily blinked. An apple. Florence grinned. Good. Now, when you saw it, did you first think of the word in your own language, then translate it to English? Lily hesitated. Yes. That's what I always do. Florence nodded. That's what we need to change. From now on, whenever you see something, say its name in English first. No translation, just the English word. Lily's eyebrows raised. That's it? Yes. But it's a habit you have to build. When you wake up in the morning, look around your room and name objects in English. Bed, window, pillow, door. When you walk outside, do the same thing. Tree, road, car, bicycle. The more you do this, the more your brain will start processing in English naturally. Lily's mind buzzed with excitement. That sounds easy enough. It is, but only if you do it consistently, Florence said. You need to make English part of your daily life. Lily looked down at the apple in Florence's hand. Okay, so I start by naming things in English. What else? Florence thought for a moment. Talk to yourself in English. Lily's eyes widened. Talk to myself? Won't that be weird? Florence laughed. Only if someone catches you. She winked playfully. But seriously, when you're alone, think in English. If you're getting ready in the morning, say to yourself, I am brushing my teeth, I am getting dressed, I am making breakfast. You don't have to say it out loud. Just think in English. Lily nodded slowly. So, instead of thinking in my own language first, I just use simple English sentences in my head. Exactly. The goal is to keep your brain in English mode all the time, Florence said. The more you do this, the less you'll need to translate. Lily was starting to feel hopeful. Okay, I can do that. But what about when I don't know a word? Should I switch to my language then? No, Florence said firmly. That's where most people go wrong. If you don't know a word, try to describe it in English instead. Describe it? Lily asked, tilting her head. Yes. For example, if you forget the word fridge, you can say, the big cold box where I keep food. Or if you forget the word umbrella, you can say, the thing that stops rain from falling on me. This way you stay in English mode and keep thinking in English. Lily grinned. That's actually a smart trick, Florence nodded. It really works. The more you train your brain to stay in English, the faster it will become natural for you. Lily looked around the park, ready to test her new skills. She saw a dog chasing its tail and immediately thought, dog. A few feet away, a boy was riding a bicycle. Bicycle, she thought. She turned to Florence excitedly. It's working. I'm naming things in English already. Florence clapped. That's great. Keep doing it every day, and don't stop there. Start thinking in full sentences, too. Lily nodded. Like, the dog is running, or the boy is riding a bicycle. Exactly, Florence said. The more you do this, the easier it will be. Soon, you won't even realize you're thinking in English. Lily felt a spark of excitement. For the first time, she believed she could actually train her brain to think in English. Okay, I'm going to try it, she said with determination. Florence smiled. That's the spirit. Just be patient with yourself. It takes time, but it works. Lily looked up at the sky, the clouds floating lazily above. She took a deep breath and whispered, "The sky is blue. The clouds are moving. The wind is soft." Florence beamed. See? You're already doing it, Lily laughed. It feels weird, but it's fun. You're on the right path, Lily, Florence said. Keep going, and soon, English will feel as natural as your first language. As they continued talking, Lily felt a new sense of confidence growing inside her. She was ready to train her brain to think in English, and she knew exactly where to start. Florence took a small object from her bag. It was an apple. She held it in front of Lily with a playful smile. Let's start simple, she said. When you see an apple, what do you think? Lily frowned slightly, thinking about the question. Well, I think of the word for apple in my language first. Then I translate it into English. Florence nodded as if she had expected that answer. That's the problem, she said. Instead of thinking in your language first, train your mind to see this and say apple immediately. No translation, just the English word, Lily blinked. That sounds easy. Florence grinned. It is, but you need to do it every day, she pointed at a tree nearby. For example, when you see this, don't think of it in your language. Just say tree in your mind. When you see a car, say car. When you see the sky, say sky. This helps your brain connect English words directly to objects without using your first language as a bridge. Lily's face lit up with understanding. Oh, so it's like training my brain to recognize words instantly. Exactly, Florence said enthusiastically. Think of your brain like a road. Right now, you take a long route. You go from the object to your native language and then to English. But we want to create a shortcut straight to English. Lily loved the idea of shortcuts. That makes sense, but what if I don't know a word in English? Florence smiled. Great question. Instead of switching to your language, try describing it in English. For example, if you don't remember the word for fork, just say, the thing I use to eat my food. The more you do this, the more your brain will automatically search for English words instead of your native ones. Lily tapped her chin thoughtfully. That sounds fun. So I should do this all the time? Yes. You can do it anywhere. At home, on the bus, while walking. Just look at objects and name them in English in your mind. Lily was excited. What else can I do? Florence leaned in. Talk to yourself in English. Lily giggled. Talk to myself? Won't people think I'm crazy? Florence laughed. You don't have to do it out loud. Just think in English. When you wake up, say, I am waking up. When you eat, say, I am eating breakfast. When you walk, say, I am going to school. This will train your brain to form English sentences naturally. Lily's eyes widened. So, if I practice this every day, my brain will start thinking in English automatically. Exactly, Florence said. And here's another tip. Watch English content without subtitles. Lily hesitated. Without subtitles? But I won't understand everything. Florence smiled. That's okay. Just focus on the main idea. Your brain will start picking up patterns and words. And if you don't understand something, try to guess its meaning instead of translating it. Lily nodded. Okay, So name? Things in English, talk to myself, and watch English content. Anything else? Yes. Immerse yourself in English as much as possible, Florence said. Read simple books, listen to English songs, and even change your phone settings to English. The more you surround yourself with the language, the faster your brain will adjust. Lily was amazed. Wow, I never thought about it this way. So, I need to create an English world around me? Florence clapped her hands. Exactly! And one last thing. Don't be afraid to make mistakes. Lily sighed. That's hard. I always worry about sounding silly. Florence shook her head. Mistakes are a part of learning. Think about babies. They don't speak perfectly, but they keep trying. That's how they learn. You have to do the same. The more mistakes you make, the better you'll become. Lily took a deep breath. All right, I'll try. I'll start naming things in English and talking to myself, and I'll stop worrying about mistakes. Florence gave her a thumbs up. That's the spirit. Let's practice right now. Look around. What do you see? Lily looked at the park. I see trees. Good. What else? Lily pointed. I see a bench. Florence nodded. Now, make a sentence. Lily thought for a moment. I see a bench where people are sitting. Florence smiled. Perfect. Now describe the people without translating, Lily observed. There is an old man. He is reading a newspaper. Excellent, Florence said. You're already thinking in English. Lily laughed. Wow, this is working. Florence grinned. See? It's all about practice. Keep doing this, and soon you won't even realize you're thinking in English, Yao say. Excitement grew. She was ready to start her journey of thinking in English. But she knew that just thinking wasn't enough. She had to start speaking more, too. Lily woke up early the next morning, determined to follow Florence's advice. She lay in bed for a moment and stretched her arms. Instead of thinking about how tired she was in her native language, she forced herself to form the thought in English. I am waking up. She smiled. It felt a little strange, but she liked the challenge. She got out of bed and walked to the mirror. Normally, she would look at her reflection and think about how messy her hair was in her own language. But today, she tried something different. My hair is messy. She ran a comb through her hair and thought, I am brushing my hair. It felt slow, but Florence had said that training the brain took time. She was ready to be patient. Lily went to her closet. She needed to pick her outfit for the day. Usually, she would say the names of her clothes in her own language, but this time she focused on English. I need a blue shirt. She picked it up and continued thinking, I am wearing a blue shirt today. When she looked outside, she noticed the sunlight streaming through her window. She wanted to describe what she saw. The sun is bright. The sky is blue. The trees are green. She smiled. It was working. She wasn't translating. She was thinking directly in English. But then a more difficult thought entered her mind. What should I do today? She hesitated. This was harder than naming objects. But she remembered Florence's advice. Just try, even if it's not perfect. I will go to class. After that, I will meet Florence. Then I will go to the park. It was a simple sentence, but it made her feel confident. When Lily entered the kitchen, her mother was already making breakfast. The delicious smell of toast filled the air. I am eating toast, she thought as she took a bite. She glanced at the cup of tea next to her plate. Normally, she would think about how warm and comforting it was in her native language. But today, she made herself think in English. The tea is hot. It tastes good. Her little brother, Alex, ran into the kitchen. What are you doing? He asked. Lily smiled. Nothing, just thinking. He laughed. You're talking to yourself. Lily didn't mind. Maybe it looked strange, but she knew it was helping her. On her way to class, Lily looked around and named everything she saw in English. That is a bus. The road is busy. The sky is clear. Every time her thoughts slipped back to her native language, She gently corrected herself. It wasn't easy, but she kept going. In class, her teacher asked a question. Lily didn't answer out loud, but she tried to form a response in English in her mind. The answer is, the Industrial Revolution started in the 18th century. Even though she didn't say it, she felt proud. She had thought in English without translating. At lunch, she sat with Florence and excitedly told her about her progress. "That's great," Florence said. "Now let's try a fun challenge. Let's have a full conversation only in English." Lily hesitated but agreed. Florence started. "What did you do this morning?" Lily's first instinct was to think in her native language, but she stopped herself. "I woke up. I ate toast. I drank tea." Florence smiled. "Good. Now describe how you feel right now." "I am happy. I feel excited," Lily said. Florence nodded. "See? You're already thinking in English without even realizing it." Lily felt more confident than ever. That evening, Lily faced her biggest challenge yet, talking to herself in English about complex ideas. Up until now, she had described simple things. But could she explain a full story? She sat by the window, looking at the stars. She wanted to describe them, but this time she wanted to go beyond simple sentences. "The stars are shining. They look beautiful. When I was a child, I used to think they were magic." She paused. "Maybe stars are like dreams. They are far away, but we can still see them. And if we try hard, maybe we can reach them." Lily gasped. She had just thought of something poetic. In English, she grabbed her notebook and started writing in English. "Today, I learned how to think in English. It was not easy, but I practiced. I named things, talked to myself, and even spoke with Florence. I feel proud. I will keep practicing." As she closed her notebook, she smiled. She was no longer just learning English. She was living it. Weeks passed, and Lily's progress was incredible. She had been following Florence's advice every day. She named objects around her in English, described her daily actions aloud, and even tried to think in English before falling asleep at night. At first, it wasn't easy. There were days when her mind automatically switched back to her native language. Sometimes she struggled to find the right words and frustration crept in. "Maybe I'm just not good enough," she thought one evening after stumbling through a conversation. But then she remembered Florence's words. "Thinking in English is like training a muscle. It takes time." She took a deep breath. "I won't give up." The biggest challenge Lily faced was speaking with confidence. Even though she was thinking more in English, she was still afraid of making mistakes when talking to others. One day in the school cafeteria, Lily overheard two classmates speaking English. She wanted to join the conversation, but fear held her back. "What if I say something wrong?" she thought. But then she remembered something else Florence had said. "It's okay to make mistakes, they're part of learning." Summoning her courage, she took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Hey, what are you guys talking about?" she asked. Her classmates turned to her and smiled. "We're just talking about the new movie that came out. Have you seen it?" Lily hesitated for a moment, then said, "No, but I want to watch it. It looks interesting." To her surprise, they continued the conversation naturally. She wasn't perfect. She paused a few times, searched for words, but she was speaking. And more importantly, she wasn't translating. After the conversation, Lily felt a rush of happiness. "I actually spoke without thinking in my own language first." She couldn't wait to tell Florence. A few days later, Lily had another test of her progress. In English class, the teacher smiled and looked around. "I have a question for you all," she said. "What did you do yesterday?" Lily's heart started racing. Usually, she would panic at this question, quickly translating her answer in her head before speaking. But this time was different. She took a deep breath, and before she could even think, the words came out. "I went to the park and read a book." The teacher nodded. "Great answer, Lily." Lily sat back in her chair, stunned. She hadn't translated. She had thought in English and spoken naturally. She turned to Florence, who was sitting next to her, and whispered, "I did it!" Florence grinned. "I knew you could!" Lily couldn't stop smiling. For the first time, English didn't feel like a foreign language. It felt natural. Lily realized that the secret to thinking in English wasn't just about practicing. It was about immersing herself in the language. She started making small changes in her daily life. Listening to English daily, she replaced her usual music with English songs and tried to understand the lyrics. She also listened to English podcasts while walking to school, watching movies without subtitles. At first, she needed subtitles, but slowly she challenged herself to watch without them. "Even if I don't understand every word, my brain is getting used to English," she reminded herself, keeping an English journal. Every night she wrote about her day in English. At first, her sentences were simple, but over time, they became more detailed. Thinking in English on purpose. Whenever she had a free moment, she tried to describe what was happening around her in English. "The weather is cold today. I'm walking home from school." This small habit made a huge difference. One afternoon, Lily and Florence sat together in the park, just like the day they first talked about thinking in English. Lily looked up at the sky and smiled. "The sky is so clear today." Florence raised an eyebrow. "Did you just say that in English without thinking?" Lily blinked. She had. She hadn't even realized it. Florence laughed. "Lily, you've done it. You're thinking in English." "Now!" Lily's heart swelled with pride. All the hard work, all the practice, it had paid off. English was no longer something she had to force. It was becoming a natural part of her mind. She turned to Florence and said, "Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you." Florence smiled. "You did it yourself, Lily. You believed in yourself, and that's what made the difference." Lily nodded. She had discovered the secret to thinking in English, not just learning words and grammar, but living in the language every day. From that moment, English was no longer just a subject for Lily. It was a part of her world. She no longer feared speaking. She no longer translated in her head. She no longer hesitated when forming sentences. Instead, she spoke with confidence. She thought in English naturally, and she knew that if she could do it, anyone could. And that's how Lily learned to think in English. If you want to train your brain to think in English, start today. Name things in English, talk to yourself, and practice every day. Did you enjoy this story? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to English Tone for more fun and easy ways to learn English. See you in the next lesson.